Most teenagers' greatest stressors are their academic performance, relationships, and extracurricular activities like sports and clubs. They don't put much thought into their health unless they're dealing with an acute illness like a cold or the flu. However, for those dealing with invisible illnesses, health becomes an important factor of our lives. We have to juggle appointments with school and social events and play a constant game of catch up because of sick days. In addition to this, when people can't look at you and tell that anything's wrong with you, they tend to not be very understanding or accepting of your illnesses. An invisible illness is an umbrella term used to define a large category of medical conditions that aren't easily visible to others. Some examples of invisible illnesses are diabetes, lupus, and mental illnesses. My name is Katelyn, and although I may look completely fine and healthy, I struggle with invisible illnesses. I have 3 main illnesses, which is how I describe my most debilitating and overarching. I have dysautonomia, which is a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system controls bodily functions we don't have to think about, like heart rate, respiration, temperature control, and digestion. I specifically have POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. So when I stand up, I get excessively tachycardic and my symptoms intensify. I have gastroparesis, which means that my stomach doesn't empty correctly, so I vomit a lot and deal with a lot of nausea and bloating. My final main illness is chronic daily migraine. My road to standing in front of you today has been different than many people would expect. I started having symptoms in 2nd grade. It began with me getting headaches at the end of the week, but my pediatricians didn't think much of it. By 7th grade, I was struggling with them daily. I switched from my pediatricians to a family doctor and was referred to a neurologist who diagnosed me with migraines. 8th grade came, and I found myself getting winded going up the stairs at school, despite being athletic. I was tested for asthma, but the results came back negative, and my pulmonologist chalked it up to perfectionism. By the end of my 9th grade year, I had tried just about every migraine medication to no avail. I started trying alternative treatments like SPG block, Botox injections, and nerve blocks. I was on the dance team at school, and I felt exhausted and like I couldn't catch my breath after every dance. But I loved it, so I pushed through. Everything changed for the worse in my sophomore year. I started hiccuping and throwing up. My doctors were struggling to figure out the cause of my sudden symptoms, and I started seeing a gastroenterologist. He did an array of tests that showed that my stomach wasn't functioning correctly. He started me on a risky medicine and said that my problem was probably neurological. At this point, I was at an all-time low. I was deeply depressed and felt completely alone. I didn't know anyone that was dealing with what I was going through, and I wasn't making any progress. I wondered, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? What's the point? I was deeply depressed and I had suicidal thoughts. I was alive, but I wasn't living. I was just going through the motions. Life was kind of a blur. I told myself I was happy, I was content with where I was, but I found myself sinking deeper and deeper. Dance practice went from being fun and exciting and something I looked forward to every day to being just a chore that I had to deal with. I had to run and throw up after every dance, and I couldn't focus. It felt like I woke up every morning exhausted, even though I slept a lot every night. I was a zombie. Then I found out about dysautonomia. A family friend told me about it, and something clicked. All of these symptoms, all of these years of feeling bad finally had a name, but it wasn't easy to get diagnosed. I mentioned it to my doctors, and they called it the new buzzword. My mom had to give me the diagnostic test herself because they just didn't believe in it. I finally got the tilt table test that allowed me to get officially diagnosed at the beginning of my junior year. I thought everything would change with that diagnosis. I could finally start medications that made me feel a little bit more alive. Sure, I was still throwing up a lot, but I could get through each day just a little bit easier. I was finally making progress, but I still felt awful. I was tweaking my medications little by little every few months. In between appointments, if my medications were making me feel worse, I couldn't do anything about it for a long time. All the while, I was still trying different treatments for my stomach and getting nowhere. My gastroenterologist referred me to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota at the beginning of my senior year. With that trip, everything finally changed. I got to do a bunch of tests that let me try a new medication that makes me actually feel a lot more alive each day. I got a new mix of medications, or a migraine cocktail, that helps me with my bad migraine days. And most importantly, I got my first round of Botox in my stomach. One quick procedure every few months, and I can keep down food better. But my journey is all too familiar for people with invisible illnesses. The average time for a POTS patient to get diagnosed is 5 years and 11 months. And that's just to get diagnosed. A diagnosis isn't a cure. That makes what you say to people dealing with invisible illnesses all that more important, because it's estimated that a third of people who have a chronic condition will experience symptoms of depression. And it doesn't come as much of a surprise when you can't live the life that you want, and the life that you're forced to live because of your conditions is full of pain and hurt. It's hard to keep living your life and being thankful for it. It can be so hard living a life that you don't feel control over. Some people in my life have been incredibly helpful and understanding, and others have made things so much harder. People love to tell you that it's all in your head. We deal with these things all the time, and it's hurtful and frustrating to tell someone that it's just all in their head. If you aren't feeling the symptoms and the struggle of an invisible illness, it is not for you to say what someone is or isn't feeling. Statements like that are why it's so hard for people with invisible illnesses to get diagnosed. 85% of POTS patients are told that it's all in their head or given similar psychiatric labels before getting their official diagnosis. But you don't look sick. Just because someone doesn't look sick doesn't mean that they aren't experiencing a range of symptoms. We deal with these symptoms all the time, so we tend to get pretty good poker faces. Just because you can't tell that I'm sick doesn't mean that I'm not experiencing a range of symptoms. People also love to tell you that it could be worse. Others may have harder or worse struggles, but that doesn't make what you're going through any easier. If something is affecting you, it deserves to be treated with respect and understanding. Statements like that put invisible illnesses below other illnesses and make us feel discredited and misunderstood. Putting invisible illnesses below visible illnesses is a form of ableism. Ableism is discrimination against people with disabilities. Ableism is especially apparent for people with invisible illnesses through other people's personal biases. Many people have personal biases that they may not realize. For example, one day I was struggling in dance and felt like I was going to pass out, so I sat out. A new girl on the team who didn't know me came up to me and said, "You just need to calm down and get over it." Although I understand that she didn't know what was wrong with me, statements like that are hurtful and imply that my illness isn't real. The same goes for labeling invisible illnesses. People with celiac disease aren't just picky. People with chronic fatigue aren't just lazy. And people with bipolar disorder aren't just moody. We shouldn't have to explain our illnesses to you to be treated with respect and understanding. The people that have helped me most have known that I was sick, but they didn't let my illnesses get in the way of our relationships. The most important people to those with invisible illnesses aren't just the doctors that treat us, but the people who lift us up and support us when we feel alone. Don't judge a book by its cover. Call it cliche, but for people with invisible illnesses, it is so much more than a notion. We teach our children at a young age to not judge a book by its cover through fables and fairy tales, but as we age, we seem to lose touch with the idea. If we as a people, as a society, were to revive this notion in ourselves, we could create a world where invisible illnesses aren't shown through a negative light, through labels like lazy and aloof, but are used to empower us to overcome our obstacles and gain support. Thank you.